Hi. There are many magical places in Ireland. And Glen Barrow in Blama, or the Slieve Blue Mountains in the Midlands, is one such place. And Glen Barrow is the source of the River Barrow, one of the three sister rivers of Ireland. And this, indeed, a very, very magical place, is the place where young Demna was looked after in a secret location by the Bandri and the Banleach, so that the enemies of his late father, Cool, would never get to him. And I'm sure you've guessed who I'm talking about. That's right, Finn McCool. Now, this story is not about Finn McCool. That's for another time. What I want to do is just set the scene for this story. Now, a long time ago, there was a group of young boys who lived in the foothills of Blama, and they liked nothing better than to go picking berries and fruits in the autumn time. And Glen Barrow in those days was rich and ripe with all sorts of fruit trees and nut trees. So on this particular morning, and it was a bright and sunny day, these boys set off from Glen Barrow up along the river, which today is just a stream, along the path gathering berries and nuts. And as they were walking along and they were having great fun, they were getting very, very hot. And didn't they come to a waterfall? And one of the boys suggested jumping in to cool down. So they stripped off, left their clothes on the bank, and in they went, splashing about without a care in the world. And when they cooled down, they got out of the waterfall, wrapped their clothes in bundles, carried them under their arms, and continued walking up the path. And they were getting very, very hot again. And didn't they come to a second waterfall? So leaving their bundles in the bank, in they went again until they cooled down. And then they got out, picked up their bundles and continued walking up the path until they came to where the third waterfall. Now they were really hot at this stage. So without a second thought, they jumped in, splashing each other, making mischief, having great fun. And when they had cooled down again, out they got, and this time they put their clothes on them. And then one of the boys noticed, just over the way, a grove of hazel trees. Now, this was no ordinary grove of hazel trees, for these trees had fruit and catkins on at the same time, and there was a shimmering light all around the trees. What the boys hadn't realised is they, by jumping into the three waterfalls, had inadvertently opened the doorway to the other world, the world of Nadini She, or the good folk. They're known by many names. So these indeed were magic trees, and the boys could not resist. And they ran over and began to pick the fruits. Now, in those days, hazel trees or hazels were not like the little hard nuts that we have today. These were as big, as sweet, as juicy as peaches. Well, the boys began to pick them and to stuff their faces, and they had never tasted anything as sweet or as delicious in their lives. And they laughed as the juice ran down their faces. And they stuffed themselves until their bellies were full. And then they picked even more and filled their gansies. And when their gansies would hold no more, they headed back down the path to their respective homes. And what stories they had to tell when they got home that night. So later when they went to bed, the boys claimed they had the worst night of their lives. They twisted and turned all night with aching bellies and the most strange of dreams. So when the morning came, they were so glad that the night and its horrors were over, and they were happy to welcome the clear light of day. But then You can imagine their horror while there on the pillows beside them were all their teeth. Not one was left in their mouth. Well, you can imagine the racket that went on in their houses that morning, with their weeping and wailing and conroning. Our lives are ruined. Our looks are lost. Their marriage prospects have gone. For with no teeth, didn't they look like little old men? And sure, who'd have them now? And of course, their parents were shocked and upset as well. So they decided to have a meeting to see if a remedy could be found for this calamity. And it was agreed that they would go and seek the counsel of the wise druid that lived up the mountain. For they knew that if anyone had a solution to this problem, it was she. So off they set, parents and boys alike, along the path up to the bahn of the wise woman. And when they arrived at the wise woman's bahn, there she was at the door, as if she'd been expecting them. She said, "What kept you?" with a grin. "Now," she said, "tell me what has happened." So the boys, all bursting and eager to tell her the story of how they went picking fruit. Of course, they were mumbling because it's very hard for young boys to speak when they have no teeth in their heads. "All right," she said, "and did you go into all 3 waterfalls?" "Yes, we did." "Well," she said, "that is how you opened the doorway into the other world." And then what happened? So they told her about how they went over to the trees and began to eat their fill of the sweetest, juiciest fruit they ever had. She said, "Did you ask permission to take them?" The boys shook their heads, flushing up in a bit of shame. "Did you even, by any chance, say thank you?" "No," said the boys, heads hanging lower in shame. "Well, I'm sure you've learnt good manners in your own home." "But we are so sorry," said the boys. "We are so sorry. It's just that we couldn't help ourselves. We couldn't resist the call of those juicy, sweet fruit. And now our lives are ruined. What are we going to do?" "Oh, shush your whingings," she said. "All is not lost. For I have intervened on your behalf with Nathini She. And they have agreed that if you go back home and return any spare fruit and return them to the grove, and if you promise that you will never, ever take any of their fruits without permission, they might then find it in their hearts to forgive you." So you can imagine the relief and the joy the boys had when they heard this. And they thanked the old woman profusely, and the parents paid her very well for her work. And the boys ran down the path back to their houses, gathered up all the spare hazels, and they met at the bottom of the path, and up they went as quickly as they could, up as far as the hazel grove. And they laid the hazels gently at the bottom of the trees, apologizing to Nadini She most profusely, most sincerely. They would never, ever, ever do that again without their permission. Now, although they didn't see Nadini She, they knew they were watching them. And then they ran down the mountain again as fast as they could in case anything else strange would happen to them. And they had an early night that night, and they slept very well. And when they woke up the next morning, weren't all their teeth back where they should be. Oh, how relieved these boys were to have their teeth back in their heads. Now, I'd like to tell you, or to be able to tell you, that they all lived happily ever after. But wouldn't that be very boring? So who knows? Now, that isn't the end of the story. The Dini Shi, although they knew that these were young boys, and boys are boys, and they didn't mean to do what they did, and they were very, very sorry and promised never to do what they did again. But there was always the risk that some greedy, senseless person might enter the other world and take their fruit. So they decided to seal up the doorway to the other world, just in case you thought you might enter by hopping into those 3 waterfalls. The new doorway to the other world is known just to a few of us on this side. But not only that, they decided to teach we humans a lesson, and they reduced the size of the Hazels and covered them in a hard shell, so that if you now want to gain any wisdom, know this: you're going to have to crack a hard shell. Shine.